To the curious, the seekers, and the experts, welcome. You're listening to Poli-Psych Podcast. Why do you think what you think? Why do you believe what you believe? Is it because you've processed information and arrived at a conclusion? Or is it because someone wants you to think and believe as you do, and has spent vast amounts of money and exerted strenuous effort to carefully craft a narrative with which you are presented, a facade, if you will, carefully laid over the top of reality? Today, the Poli-Psych team is considering two organizations, one that has spent vast amounts of money and one that has exerted strenuous effort to, as we propose, accomplish precisely that. To craft an alternate version of reality intended to persuade you to accept a facade as truth, and to obtain your consent for an agenda known fully to a very few people. So with me today to investigate these ideas are Ken. Hello, Ken.
Hi, Cindy.
And Don. Hello, Don.
Hello, Cindy and Ken.
Ken, I believe that today you wanted to begin with a brief discussion of an interesting term that has been used, possibly overused, by our communities and our culture.
Sure. The phrase is conspiracy theory, and it's an derivation. We have two words, and the second word is commonly changed from a value judgment adjective to actually theory is a scientific term, a hypothesis. And then it's also personified in the form conspiracy theorist, and it's acquired a meaning that really has been abstracted and redefined from the roots of these two words to be a pejorative term that's assigned to almost anyone who comes up with a competing crime, basically forensic theory about the interaction of players in a either a crime or a political event or anything of that sort. The human experiences occur within the shadow of social bonds, and many times those social bonds are below the level of sense perception to outsiders, and that could be a family or anybody really. You have private conversation and you have a private relationship with that person intellectually or whatever level, but it's sort of shielded based on the level of familiarity. So this phrase, the problem I've always had with it is that it denies the essential human aspect of just our ability, our divinely inspired ability to look at sense data and actually look beyond the sense data and form ways. Science has advanced based on the scientific method through that way. We've also been able to discern the nature of reality based on spiritual vectors, and it's really an advanced capability that we have. That it's kind of an unfair label when this is thrown at anyone. It takes this sort of divinely inspired capability that we have and reduces it to a schoolyard threat or a schoolyard characterization. It essentially dismisses the deeper functioning of the person you're attacking. So in my conclusion, it's kind of a weaponized catchphrase.
Yeah, absolutely. I really think it's like a way to throw a monkey wrench into the intuitive aspect of our thinking, because when we hear things that look like they're not what they appear to be, our intuition should kick in. But if you've been subject to ridicule for as a conspiracy theorist for thinking thoughts that are outside of the mainstream, then then you're going to shut down your own process, your own thought process. And that's really the most insidious form of censorship, is when we're taught to deny our own thoughts, our own intuition. And that's exactly what that phrase was designed to do. And it was weaponized by the CIA about 3 years after the JFK assassination, when the say cottage industry of conspiracy investigations had gone on below the radar. A lot of people knew that JFK was not killed by a lone gunman. In fact, there's been polls out that were within, say, 30 years or more after the assassination. Most Americans do not believe it was a single gunman, or it was not Lee Harvey Oswald. And the CIA did not like that their cover story had been blown. And of course, I'm talking about the rogue elements within the CIA. But those rogue elements that were tied to the assassination needed to provide a way to minimize the damage that was already happening. And they came up with that term. And it's still in use today as a way of ridiculing, as Ken says, the natural God-given thought process, so we become our own censors. It's quite disturbing.
I think there's a sales technique that is referred to as raise the person's objections before they do, in order to manage what they might object to as far as purchasing something. I think this is a kind of a form of that they're trying to get out ahead of, and not just one objection, not just one theory, not just one accusation, but many, and just lump them all together and address them before they're even raised.
And again, every explanation for unseen behavior has to be a theory, and we can't, usually it'll be proven in court through an oscillation between sensing and intuition, at least in the Jungian conception. And I guess we have to be careful. I wish there were more precise ways of expressing the phrase. There certainly are cases where we have paranoid theories that have no basis in reality, or we could have ambiguous, as Scott Adams has said, two movies on one screen, where we do have sense data, but it's interpreted. The intuition differs between two groups of people who want to believe a certain version of it. And I think the case that we have going right now with the impeachment hearings, it's based on a very objective, reasonably objective set of sense data based on the transcript, but yet the readers are being encouraged to adopt competing intuitive conclusions about that sense data. And the way life goes. And what we'll be doing today is we'll be looking at a series of events that may or may not involve some amount of coordination. And I would say the biggest problem I have with the conspiracy theory label is that it almost completely makes the sociological study itself, it disarms it completely, so that we can no longer look at social powers and social vectors in any way. We just have to look at our CNN, sense data, television, whatever they tell us is reality. And at that point, we're just no better than herd animals. The human species needs to have a well-developed intuition and a way of sifting through competing interpretations of reality. And what we'll do today, we're going to look at a few of the crafters of that reality and how skillfully they sometimes do operate. We'll attempt to tie that to specific examples, which we'll display on our screen as we go along.
Now, before you leave that whole introduction of the conspiracy theory label, I wanted to finish off, Ken, with one
Sure.
note, is that the if you think about it and you realize we are under attack, our unconscious mind is under attack from the pervasive use of this pejorative label in our culture today, what you want to, I think we can do if we're aware of that attack is not just use it or blow through it and say, well, I'm one of those, because that's kind of, I think, accepting the label as if it were truthful. We can, I think, best counteract it by aggressively but concisely refuting it with a phrase, one that I really like, that I attribute to Alex Jones, and he may not be the first person to say it, but he says, questioning known liars. And that is exactly what we are being taught not to do by using the conspiracy theory label. But if we say we're questioning known liars, then that is an aggressive pushback and allows us to express our intuition, because we're not saying we know everything. We're not saying we think these theories are true. We're just saying we're just questioning known liars. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, it's a very, very good. We're looking at character, I think, also is the imprint, the social imprint that is a matter of fact, looking at actual behavior, and we'll actually be looking at that today. So thanks for bringing that up. New knowledge. For those who haven't been following the channel, we've been picking on them a little bit, mostly because of their impact during the what we now call the Russia hoax. I think history will be judging that fairly accurately with that catchphrase. It was just not proven. Another, I guess we could say, conspiracy theory. Shall we dare to say it? As it came through the Mueller investigation collapse, it just proved itself to be a pretty apt phrase or characterization. The leading force behind new knowledge appears to be an individual named Jonathan Morgan, and his background, State Department advisor during the Obama administration, relatively youthful, and I think that probably was his first major promotion into that administration. But he was very close to the ISIS phenomenon, studying the details with that, which raises a few eyebrows in other ways that we probably won't get into today. But also with background with DARPA, Brookings Institution, and had some other partners that were also fairly influential, Ryan Fox and Renee DiResta, who appeared before Congress. But one of the big problems we have is, going back to what Don was saying about character and known liars. He did get involved in a controversy with involving Facebook ads, and Jonathan claimed that he was just sort of testing the machine. And so Jonathan's experience with the Roy Moore election was the deciding factor in sort of getting him kicked off of Facebook at that time for falsifying and actually probably influencing the outcome of the election. So based on that, the involvement with ISIS is a little suspicious. I know there's some competing hypotheses on how that was propagated and created. And New Knowledge has actually, after their stint as an aggregator for, and actually ghostwriter for the Russia hoax phase, has moved into another field of faction. They call it Faction Tracker. I'm not sure if they've retained that same product name, but I think so. So the new company is called Yonder, and they've since scrubbed the old articles and the old Russiagate articles, which we'll have on display. Just the headers. We had saved the headers. And what New Knowledge was doing, basically, they were serving as ghostwriters not only for the New York Times, CBS, NBC, PBS, but they would also spread their articles out into even smaller outlets. So you could get one headline, and I just gave one example. We'll show on screen if you're near a computer, listener. The article on 5G. Your 5G phone won't hurt you, but Russia thinks what Russia wants you to think. and then it cuts off from there. But you'll see the same article popping up in all these different outlets, and it's just staggering. It's a staggering amount of influence, and it's a relatively small company. It's the personnel have shifted a little bit, but we still have Ryan Fox and Jonathan Morgan, and they're kind of going into this new realm of also advertising, um, lining up advertisers with political vectors to boost their brand, when in most cases, in many cases, it causes the opposite effect. And I don't, sometimes we've reflected upon this before, is how these companies could possibly um, commit marketing suicide by alienating half their audience. But nevertheless, it is happening. The boards of these companies are packed with people with a certain political agenda, and we'll definitely see that uncovered in the next segment that we're doing right here and now on another company. But Don, any comment on our old friends, New Knowledge Yonder?
Well, I'm just thinking in general terms about the lay of the land and the way these kind of things go. And what I'm thinking about is when we are thinking politics and saying that somebody is promoting a bias in politics or has alienated half of their customer base, etc., I think we might be framing too small. We might want to think at a higher level and think, well, maybe it's not about politics per se, but it's about control, and a political aspect is only one means of control. But the monetary is, of course, is a very large method by which whole groups of people can be controlled. And if you can herd people that are more likely to follow the herd, then you can attract a bigger herd. And so I think maybe some of these people like Jonathan Morgan are really in the business of figuring out how to herd the largest number of people. And in order to do that, I think they recognize that they have to cull the herd from the individualists, the people that are really resist being herded. So that tends to be, and those that are on these days in the United States are known by the political label of being on the right side of the political spectrum, in which they support individual liberties and the Constitution. Those are the people that need to be eliminated from the herd so that the herd can grow and gain economic clout, which is really what these people are after. It's not about the greed, but it's about the control.
Yeah, and I think what bothers me the most is it's really not very compelling conversion material for their opposition. I think this is again the subconscious vector that's sort of that's a big tell to me personally, just from looking at this, working with this for a little while, is the fact that rather than using good conversion or advertising or compelling, having a little bit of empathy with the other side, they're they're looking more at marginalizing the other side, or balkanizing, for lack of a better term. And it's used a lot in the State Department, and also our intel services when they go overseas and uh, gum up the works in foreign countries. Usually they're creating factions. I think that process was occurring in Ukraine, where they literally converted the country into a civil war battlefield, and all in the services of the Atlantic Council, just kind of preserving the allegiance being more to the NATO balance of power, rather than what was the right solution for the American people. Is the solution to poke the bear or not? Maybe it is. I don't know, but it needed to be an open discussion rather than looking at it in that realm. It's more of a hide it from view, and split these groups into pieces. And that's why I'm very suspicious about their work with ISIS. What were they doing exactly? And I just pose that as an open question. And And are they doing the same thing? This is the subconscious part. Are they looking at the internet as the next target to take to basically disable the internet, and rather than conquer it, collapse it, and collapse it into small factions, isolate those factions from each other through this faction tracker software that's displayed on their site, and basically disable it from causing another um, organic political revolution like we have with the election of President Trump, and to kind of walk that back for the next generation of influencing activities and take that out of the picture.
I agree, Ken. That's exactly where I am concerned that this whole faction tracker type stuff is going. It's the whole people that are not really providing services so much as they are in terms of giving us the internet and all of these new fancy toys. Is they're giving us things that can be used to hurt us and to control us. And as you were talking there, what the example that leapt in my mind, and you were kind of touching on it, but I saw yesterday, I watched an interview, or at least part of an interview of Nikki Haley as she was talking about her interactions with Secretary of State Tillerson and other people like with General Kelly, that having to do with how the she was supporting the president and thought that if you disagreed with the president, then you had a right, you should tell him to his face. Whereas Tillerson and General Kelly that were disagreeing with the president. The point being that in foreign policy, President Trump wanted to cut off foreign aid, but Tillerson, before he was fired, before he was let go, before he was forced to resign, he actually gave half of the foreign aid money that he was not supposed to give, that he was under direct orders not to give. And that was what he was doing. Tillerson was either knowingly or just subconsciously buying into this process that, Ken, you just described, is that they're trying to grow the faction that they want to grow rather than cutting it all off completely. See, by means of foreign aid, you exert control. And President Trump was saying, no, we don't want to control you. We just want to cut off your aid. But foreign aid always comes with strings attached. That's the way it's always been. And there's always been that expectation. So President Trump was basically cutting the nations loose, and Tillerson did not want to do that. And he was just saying, no, we've got to, Trump was saying we've got to cut them loose, and Tillerson was saying, no, we want to string them along. And so these are two different philosophies of the way that we deal with our fellow humans. And it really, Trump has a way of kind of causing that conflict to come to the fore, to be able to really force the question of whether or not you're going to use your powerful position to either set people free, and which can be painful, or to control them and let that be seen as a benefit to them and you. Two different philosophies. Anyway, that was kind of long-winded, but yeah, that's what I see going on there.
I think we will definitely, the next show that we do, we'll look at how the chips have been falling with this hearing that's going on right now. The first day, as we're recording this, the House IC had an open hearing on I guess the goal is impeachment, and the reason is Ukraine. But let's go over to we've got another company that Cindy is going to tell us about, and I had never been aware of the size and breadth of this other influencer. Again, it's kind of behind the scenes. We'll put on our intuition caps today, and rather than just present theory, we're going to actually look at fact and actually reputation and how this company has impacted our lives.
Yes, we wanted to take a look at Accel, and it's a funding company.
How's that spelled, Cindy?
It is spelled Accel. It sounds like Excel, obviously, but it's more, like the root of the word accelerate. And I believe that's why I think they probably wanted the sound of Excel, but the meaning of Accel, which is, they definitely have played the role of accelerating certain companies. And one of them, I'll just scroll through a bit. There's a huge number of companies in which they're involved. I've scrolled for all this time and I'm still just at the B's.
Most of the names people won't recognize, but some of the names they will, and there's some surprises in there.
Yes, so I'll go ahead and move to these are some of the companies that Accel likes to highlight. Among them here are Facebook, Slack, Atlassian, CrowdStrike, interestingly.
Heard of that one?
Oh, haven't we all? Dropbox, Flipkart, Qualtrics, Braintree. And what they do, again, they provide funding. And they were one of the corporations that they like to point to is Facebook. And on this portion of their, this website refers to Facebook, but it is on the Accel website. They like to let people know how they were instrumental in helping Facebook grow. And of course, we all know that there was an injection of capital into Facebook, and it was through this corporation, Accel.
And in my mind, I've got to point out that directly ties Accel to the CIA, because I'm aware of the research that has shown that there was a CIA program called something like oh gosh, the name escapes me at the moment, but something like Profile or something about, it was a personal tracking system, and it closed down supposedly one day, and Facebook was born the next day. So, and the code was directly lifted from it, and there's been people that have spoken out about that. So, to me, this whole arrangement screams deep state.
It does seem to, and I'm delighted that we did discuss conspiracy theories a little before we began this look, because it's very difficult to look at these links created by Accel without theorizing that somebody has conspired to fund these certain companies. And I do want to go back just for a moment. We all know what CrowdStrike is. For anybody who doesn't happen to know what CrowdStrike is, CrowdStrike was cited as the source for the, quote, proof, end quote, that the DNC servers were hacked. And this has all been very shadowy. There hasn't ever been a lot of clarity about what actually happened. And so this company, Accel, is involved with CrowdStrike. So what we're seeing, we're not actually stating that anything is a fact. We are theorizing. We are looking at links between different companies and how they have behaved in ways that have limited or had as a goal, maybe not limited, maybe direct is a better word, direct opinion of Americans and beyond America to conform, as Ken was referring to with the conspiracy theory, to bring a conformance to opinion, to cut off those opinions that might differ.
Yeah, and I'd say I'm going to put it in just a brief aside in the it's just called sociology, really. It's social psychology, and many times I think both sides lose track of the fact that every social group has a certain amount of cohesion and even internal intuition that it almost transcends words. And it happens on both sides of the political spectrum when we'll see a certain news article and we'll just know that, well, this is how our compatriots are going to react to this, and we're going to go and tweet a certain way or design a meme or something like that, and there'll be this a marvelous sort of cohesion that'll suddenly appear. But it really, what's going on, it's the social gravity, the social gravitation that's assuming consciousness in a way that humans do, and it's just part of being human. It happens in organized religions, also have this sort of even deeper level of subconscious, collective unconscious cohesion. And in Christianity, the body of Christ is sometimes mentioned, and this is just it's a fact of life, and I'd almost call it self-evident. But when they have leadership that has essentially taken on the task of promoting and keeping that social animal alive, that's sort of it's what we might call a conspiracy, but it's really something a lot more subtle.
Absolutely. And financing is, especially the way Accel functions, they're back a couple steps from what is actually done. So obviously, we all know that through financing, it is possible to direct and control corporations. And one aspect of what Accel does that I really want to highlight, because I feel that it lends an understanding of what they do and how they do it. GoFundMe is under the Accel umbrella. The way I actually learned about Accel was I heard someone talking about in alternative media discussing how parents who had vaccine injured children were asking for funds on GoFundMe. And I guess this had been a thing that the parents would do. I mean, obviously, when you have a vaccine injured child, you need financial help. And GoFundMe cut off the accounts of anyone who is claiming that their child was injured by a vaccine. So as this article highlights, GoFundMe exposed for taking money from Big Pharma to deplatform vaccine skeptics, Accel does have ties to Big Pharma. And this in itself is a concern. I mean, this is one specific instance. I think Craig Sawyer, who was soliciting funds for child rescue from pedophiles, was also defunded some time ago. So there are these specific concerns, but one thing that I want to highlight is this broader concern. This is an interview between Rob Solomon of GoFundMe and Ryan Sweeney of Accel Partners, and I'm going to play a brief clip here.
Over the last few years, GoFundMe has become the largest marketplace for causes online. Our goal is to become the largest destination for giving in the world. If we were a nonprofit or a foundation, we'd be the 4th or 5th largest nonprofit in the world, and we'd be the 2nd largest foundation after the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So, scale and people coming together to help people is kind of changing the way people give, and we're going to evolve from crowdfunding to just becoming the world's largest site for giving.
And what I want to note about this, about their point of view and their plans, Rob Solomon states very clearly that he sees GoFundMe as being the future of charitable giving. That's his goal, to through GoFundMe control virtually all charitable giving. So when we see this aspect of what they're doing, not only are they shifting public opinion through this, kind of social pressure, but they're directly using finance, and they're not even only using their own money. They are proposing to direct all charitable giving. And of course, when they're in this interview, in this discussion, they're not mentioning that they cut off people whose political stance or ideological point of view they don't like. But in effect, that's definitely what they're doing. So I see a huge danger in this kind of control.
And by the way, I've just found what I was looking for. It was bothering me that I couldn't remember the name of Facebook when it was a CIA program, and it was called LifeLog. And I found a Reddit post that says, and what I remembered hearing, DARPA's LifeLog canceled the same day Facebook was founded, February 4th, 2004. So that information kind of seals it for me. But that's just one of many factors. And so the whole idea of Mark Zuckerberg's creating this as a college student is just a cover story.
I'm astounded at the breadth of this company. When we were talking offline earlier, you mentioned Walmart, or the complex of companies.
Right, yeah. And so when I was scrolling through that list, I forced myself to go all the way to the end. And what did I see when I was near the end of the alphabet? But Walmart. And I did a double take, and I thought, I've seen so many small startup companies that I didn't recognize the names of, and a few that I did, that I was just staggered to see a giant like Walmart. And then what does that tell me? That tells me that, okay, I guess the first thought would be, wow, they managed to hook a really big fish on their little line, these visionaries. I wonder how they did that. And then the next thought is, well, maybe an alternative explanation is that the big fish was really the seed money for this fishing operation that provided the funds to enable a lot of startups, but to not have the appearance of control, but actually, they were able to expand a monopoly so that it didn't look like a monopoly. And if you think in terms of a monopoly mindset, that the controllers that have been in charge of American industry for generations, what they do, this is along those lines. And so it's in a different form today than it was in the Sherman antitrust days and the Standard Oil days of Rockefeller, but it's still the same mindset. The big money doesn't stop and get satisfied, and we've got this huge company and we're happy with it. No, the people that are behind that company look for ways to extend their reach even farther, and they are smart enough to disguise it. And I think that's what we've got going on here.
One question about the table: Are these bond issues? These series? It always is listing Series A, Series B. Were they working with banks to underwrite bonds, or what was going on here with this funding?
Well, I confess I haven't looked at that level of detail. I'm just I'm noticing the things that you're noticing, and just using my intuition and letting that intuition find its way to the airwaves here. And so all we're doing is saying, here's some ground that looks like it might yield something pretty fertile from some research.
Yeah, we might want to keep looking into this. Looking at the balance sheet as a whole, I'd say then we look at the equity side for just a second. And interestingly, the structure of Facebook contains A and B shares, and it's actually, I'm just reading from the quote. It's the blurb that popped up on Google, which is still somewhat useful for research. You just have to dig deeper for items that they don't like. But they left this one up, and it's Mark Zuckerberg owns the majority of the voting rights to Facebook due to a dual class structure that weighs certain shares over others. Facebook's Class B shares, controlled by Zuckerberg and a small group of insiders, has about 18% of the shares, but they also have 10 votes per share. So you multiply, it's pretty much would drown out any other proxy. And the other thing is, when you have institutional shareholders, which Facebook is, it's a major Fortune 500 company. I think we're up to, or the S&P 500. We're up to, I think they're number 5 or 6 on that list at least. And Google actually also has a similar structure. I don't think they were on the list, but um, I think in Google's case, we have A and C shares, I believe, and they essentially, it's a complicated structure, but it's, the bottom line is it protects the voting rights of the principal beneficiaries, which in this case are, their names are probably in the fine print here somewhere, but it's very tightly held. It's almost run as a private, as a sole,
Exactly.
a
Yeah,
partnership, really.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. Is this is a lesson in how to make a public company actually function like a private company, and it's all deception. It's all smoke and mirrors, and it isn't really a public company. It just has that illusion.
Now, the problem I have with this, if these are bond issues, in fact, and I think they probably are because they aren't equity issues, is that they would, in a worst case scenario, they would be standing in line in front of the shareholders. So whoever's funding these A and B class bond issues would be making a nice return on the yield.
Yeah, it's a
And
big club, but you're not in it, as
right.
a famous man once said. And how do you get into those special categories? Well, I think you're invited in.
Well, yes, and that's where the social cohesion comes in. The network of interlocking directorate and the alumni of the large business schools, and the political vector there is almost certainly going to be a little more leftist oriented. Not that intrinsically is, people are entitled to their own calling as far as politics goes, but I think when it becomes an organized effort to engineer consent and take culture down a road that you somehow have assumed for your own, to use market powers in that end, or to use even monopoly power in the case of the tech companies who have really hijacked public infrastructure with their
Yeah.
content providers, and we all need content provided, but they've gone one step beyond that. They're using that content to craft social reality.
And the purpose, and they're doing that so as to increase the size of the herd. And by that, I mean, make more people that were not herd animals into herd animals by downplaying those that are individualist. And I'm emphasizing somebody that is an individualist as someone who purposely doesn't go along with the herd. And these are the ones that need to be eliminated when you're constructing a monopoly, because ultimately the consumer having too much choice is a bad thing for these people in terms of their control.
Right. It's using tricks of influence, which again, name calling, the whole conspiracy theory thing is really an outgrowth of that social, naming and isolation, which seems to be more common on the left, unfortunately. And it's hard to say why. What do we have any theories on why we see such a difference in the it's somewhat the conversion or inclusion vector on the right, as opposed to the opposite? Almost, you just looking at the left seems to be able to demonize much more readily the opposite, the opposing force, and to also actually kind of eradicate it in some cases completely from influence, or worse.
Well, I go back, Ken, to your explanation of the difference between feelers and thinkers, and I think that we have become, with the influence of the modern educational system and all of the societal tools around us, such as television, we've become more feelers than thinkers, and the feelers resort to the ad hominem attacks, name calling. So because their reasoning is less well developed. And I mean, I'm sure there are other aspects to it, but for me, that goes to the core.
Yeah, and I guess we'll find out what the ultimate reality is in human culture, and I think we might start to see that in election 2020 with we're already starting to see signs of it, the bleed off from movements like the walk away movement, and I think the African American and other minority votes are starting to turn, or at least starting to become more open minded and immune to the influence of cultural normative shaming strategies, like we see with the labeling, the endless labeling of people. And
Yeah, I agree. To the point where I can't help but wonder, because it seems like this whole name calling thing by the left has gotten so noticeable by society at large that I can't help but think that might be a part of the present administration and President Trump's strategy, is to leave that out there so that people recognize it and begin to say, well, wait a minute, is this all politics has become, is just name calling? And then the desire, the appetite for something else is created just by that oversaturation.
yeah, I think the progression, at least the way it's looking now, is we have the left mostly singing to their own base, and maintaining a pretty cohesive view of reality, which is sort of anti-Trump. It's just that's really the
Orange
end of
man
it.
bad.
Right. They've almost to the point where they've forgotten their candidates for 2020. I think we have another debate coming up next week, but nobody's even talked about that. We may hear about Tulsi Gabbard when she strays from the herd and they try to, demonize her, but it's getting very dark and negative, and it doesn't work with people over time. I think people get tired of the negativity and they get curious about what's going on the other side of that fence. And the voting process itself is an introverted function. And we'll just see on the surface Cindy's got the table up there, the extroverted function. You're going to hear from the extroverts, but even an extrovert has introverted ideas, and they may not share with socially how they really feel until they get into that voting booth. And that's why the polls are just they're not capable of assessing the interior experience that well. A poll, when somebody appears and wants to take a poll, they're basically looking at the extroverted product. And when somebody goes into that voting booth, anything can happen.
That's an interesting point, and I think that's one reason why there is such so much discussion about voting integrity and the integrity or not of the voting system. So that'll play a role too. And when we see this kind of power, again, it is called conspiracy theory. But it's when we see this kind of evidence of this kind of power behind the scenes, and we do get to see glimpses of how they operate. And then when we project what we are able to see on what we aren't able to see and draw conclusions, the people who, if somebody wants so badly what these people are evidently spending billions of dollars and even more to obtain, where will they stop? Well, is there any line that they won't cross?
I think in conclusion here, we've seen this in strategy before, and it happened during World War II with Nazi Germany attacking through the Ardennes, and they conquered France, and they came back they did the exact same thing in the Battle of the Bulge, and by then it was a miserable failure, but they were kind of locked into that. They were reliving their success using the same old method, and I think we're seeing that today. Is the divide and conquer and the name calling, that did work for a very long time, and it propelled a party that had really kind of lost its core into to maintain their power, almost won the actually did win the technically the popular vote with the Hillary Clinton candidacy, but that failed, but they're still trying. And in fact, today we have this impeachment hearing on this sort of threadbare Ukrainian interpretation of a phone call that was really pretty simple in content and probably completely called for and legal. It's just that Joe Biden happened to be doing something he shouldn't have been doing, and he was the vice president, and he was running against Donald Trump. But none of those categories are mutually exclusive. So it's just a rut that they're in with this. It's like their battle of the bulge. They can't seem to resist going back to the same old strategy with no insight into how it's going to work. How are historians going to look at this time? And I think when they make a movie of this period, it will be a comedy.
I like that. I'm also fascinated by your Battle of the Bulge comparison, because I had just heard another alternative news broadcaster use that same analogy, and I don't know if you also listened to it too, but I kind of
Nope.
doubt it. I think it's just something that's out there, and it's the idea that let's say anti-traditional American liberty concepts are so bold in their defense of their current power systems of control. The fact that they want to appear invincible and don't strategize very well really seems to be very much like that Battle of the Bulge turning point in World War II, where you had they believed their own press releases, they believed they were going to win, and their supply just wasn't able to withstand. They just couldn't do what they believed in their minds they could do. They didn't have the gas, they didn't have the resources, they ran out of steam. And I think we might be just at that point where that's just about ready to happen, and we could see a major turning point in the next several days or weeks that's very much like that Battle of the Bulge turning point in World War II.
Well, we will certainly be watching that and following that. So, dear curious seekers and experts, thank you for joining us for this discussion. We hope that you have enjoyed this time as we have. If you have, we would ask that you please click like, share this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our BitChute channel, and please, by all means, follow us on Twitter. Thanks again, and until next time, take care.